The urgency is really to build trust and engage in dialogue. I think increasingly there is a recognition that there is no credible pathway to a net zero economy and a climate resilient development without addressing trade and trade policies. Now, more specifically, there are three areas that should be really high on in terms of priorities. First is decarbonization of heavy industry. Steel, cement, aluminium, these account for roughly a quarter of global emissions. There's been a lot of discussions about how to scale up the diffusion of technologies. There's been a lot of discussions on border carbon adjustment, but these are really unlikely to solve the problem, particularly in developing countries. The second area that really requires urgent attention is the energy transition. How do we scale up access, diffusion of clean energy, particularly in developing countries? We're today in a situation where clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuel energy. We even have a problem of overcapacity in some countries, introducing of solar energy, for example. But at the same time, in many developing countries, having access to those technologies is exceedingly difficult. Cost of investment is very high, and there is a particular role for trade here to really promote the scaling up of these technologies. And the third area that is particularly urgent is around climate change adaptation and more broadly building climate resilient economies. In the face of drought, floods, extreme weather events, developing countries are increasingly affected by climate change. It affects tourism, it affects agriculture, it affects trade infrastructure, and there's a particular need for cooperation in this area to help developing countries cope with those changes and make sure that trade and supply chains play their role in building more resilient economies. But all these things need to take into account the imperative of development at the same time. We can't just look at it from an emissions reduction or climate adaptation perspective for many countries. This is only palatable if at the same time it addresses their very urgent development concerns.